Hello dear students, welcome to SJ's classes and your last video lesson on George Orwell's Animal Farm. We have finished reading the textbook. We have analyzed the important events that happen in each chapters. Now it's time to compare this great novella with the Russian Revolution of 1917. In this video lesson, I will be drawing analogies between the events in Animal Farm, the characters in this novella, with the events and characters in the Great Russian Revolution of 1917. Let us see some of the important comparisons between the novel and the Russian Revolution. This particular video lesson and topic is important because George Orwell wrote this novella to criticize Russian Revolution. He wanted to convey the message that the revolution was a failure and it ended where it all began. He wanted to convey this particular message. He was an anti-Stalinist and he wanted to convey his criticism of Stalin in some way, and he chose the medium of a novel. Let us analyze the important comparisons, analogies between Animal Farm and Russian Revolution. Animal Farm by George Orwell paints a picture of the political events of the Russian Revolution. One of Orwell's goals in writing Animal Farm was to portray the Russian, or rather the Bolshevik Revolution of 1917. I'm sure you might have come across the terms Bolsheviks and Mensheviks. The 1917 revolution was more of a Bolshevik-led revolution. Therefore, it can also be referred to as Bolshevik Revolution of 1917. So Orwell's goals in writing Animal Farm was to portray this Bolshevik Revolution of 1917 as one that resulted in a government more oppressive, totalitarian and deadly than the one it overthrew. It is a novel about anthropomorphic farm animals that start a revolution. Anthropomorphic means to ascribe human characteristics to non-human things. Animal Farm is, however, much more than your typical animal tale. The parallels that the author draws between the plot and the Russian Revolution make this story an example of an allegory. An allegory, as you know, is a metaphorical representation. Many of the characters and events of Orwell's novel parallel those of the Russian Revolution. In short, Manor Farm is model of Russia, and all Major, Snowball and Napoleon represent the dominant figures of the Russian Revolution. Mr. Jones is model on Tsar Nicholas II, 1868 to 1918, the last Russian emperor. His rule during 1894 to 1917 was marked by his insistence that he was the uncontestable ruler of the nation. During his reign, the Russian people experienced terrible poverty and upheaval marked by the Bloody Sunday massacre in 1905, when unarmed protesters demanding social reforms were shot down by the army near Nicholas Palace. As the animals under Jones lead lives of hunger and want, the lives of millions of Russians worsened during Nicholas' reign. When Russia entered World War I and subsequently lost more men than any other country in any previous war, the outraged and desperate people began a series of strikes and mutinies that signaled the end of Tsarist control. When his own generals withdrew their support of him, Nicholas abdicated his throne in the hopes of avoiding an all-out civil war. But the civil war arrived in the form of the Bolshevik Revolution, when Nicholas, like Mr. Jones of Animal Farm, was removed from his place of rule and then died shortly thereafter. So that is the first and foremost comparison between Animal Farm and Russian Revolution. We have compared the character of Mr. Jones with Sir Nicholas II, who was a terrible ruler, under whom the subjects experienced misery. Let us look at the next comparison. Old Major is a well-respected pig who inspires the animals of Manor Farm to consider revolting in the hopes of a new and better life. He outlines what it would take to create a fair government that benefits all, but he dies before his dream is ever realized. Old Major represents Karl Marx, who in 1848 inspired an uprising against the ruling class with his book The Communist Manifesto, and also there is a second possibility. He can also be seen as Vladimir Lenin, who helped lead the Russian Revolution of 1917 using Marxist principles. As Old Major outlines the principles of animalism, a theory holding that all animals are equal and must revolt against their oppressors, Lenin was inspired by Karl Marx's theory of communism, which urges workers of the world to unite against their economic oppressors. As animalism imagines a world where all animals share in the prosperity of the farm, communism argues that a communal way of life will allow all people to live lives of economic equality. Old Major is absolute in his hatred of man, as Lenin was uncompromising in his views. He is widely believed to have been responsible for giving the order to kill Nicholas and his family after the Bolsheviks had gained control. Lenin was responsible for changing Russia into the USSR, as Old Major is responsible for transforming Manor Farm into Animal Farm. Like Old Major, both Marx and Lenin didn't live to see people triumph. So that is the second comparison that we have done. Initially we compared Mr. Jones with Sir Nicholas II. In this particular slide we have analyzed Old Major, the character Old Major, with two characters of Russian Revolution, Karl Marx and Lenin. Now let us move on to the third comparison. After Old Major's death, three pigs emerge as leaders. I hope you know their names. It is Snowball, Napoleon and Squealer. Snowball wants to carry out the dreams of Old Major and improve the economy through industry, which is reflected by the windmill in the farm. However, he loses the battle for power and ends up being chased off the farm. His role is similar to the one of Leon Trotsky, a close associate of Lenin's, who was exiled from the Soviet Union after he became a threat to its leader, Joseph Stalin. Snowball's plans for the windmill and programs reflect Trotsky's intellectual character and ideas about the best ways to transform Marx's theories into practice. Trotsky was also the leader of Lenin's Red Army, as Snowball directs the army of animals that repel Jones. Now let us come to the analogy between Napoleon and Stalin. Napoleon took power by force and used it to improve conditions for himself and his supporters at the expense of the working class. Public executions ensured that no one would cross him. Napoleon, in that regard, represents Stalin, who was not considered part of the Russian Revolution per se, which means with respect to its inherent nature. He was rather a transitional figure to a bureaucratic dictatorship whose economic ideas resulted in a famine that killed millions of people. Further, during Stalin's purges, several more million people were executed for opposing him. Like Napoleon, Stalin was unconcerned with debates and ideas. Instead, he valued power for its own sake, and by 1927 had assumed complete control of the Communist Party through acts of terror and brutality. Napoleon's dogs are like Stalin's KGB, his secret police that he used to eliminate all opposition. As Napoleon gains control under the guise of improving the animals' lives, Stalin used a great deal of propaganda, symbolized by Squealer in the novel, to present himself as an idealist for the working for change. His plan to build the windmill reflects Stalin's 5-year plan for revitalizing the nation's industry and agriculture. Stalin's ordering Lenin's body to be placed in the like Lenin's tomb, shrine like Lenin's tomb parallels Napoleon's unearthing of old Major Skull, and his creation of the Order of the Green Banner parallels Stalin's creation of the Order of Lenin. So these are some of the comparisons between Napoleon, the character Napoleon in Animal Farm, and Stalin in Russian Revolution. Now let us look at some of the minor comparisons that we come across in the novel as well as the revolution. Numerous events in the novel are based on ones that occurred during Stalin's rule. The Battle of Cauchy parallels the civil war that occurred after the 1917 revolution. Frederick, the owner of Pinchfield Farm, represents Adolf Hitler, who forged an alliance with Stalin in 1939, but who then found himself fighting Stalin's army in 1941. Frederick seems like an ally of Napoleon's, but his forged banknotes reveal his true character. Adolf Hitler was a ruthless dictator of Germany and was responsible for World War II. Mr. Frederick was also a tough, shrewd man, perpetually involved in lawsuits and with a name for driving hard bargains. These characteristics are similar to Hitler's characteristics and actions. Through the course of the book, Frederick becomes an enemy and then a friend and then an enemy again to Napoleon, who makes many secret deals and treaties with him. One of the major problems the two farms have is the issue of the timber. Napoleon sells the wood to Frederick for banknotes only to find that they are false. The banknotes which Frederick gave Napoleon were forgeries, were false currencies. During the worldwide depression, countries were forced by necessity to trade with other countries. One country would have a product or natural resource, another country would not. Therefore, to survive, the country would trade. Many times the trades were unfair and fraudulent. This created many international problems. Also, the deal symbolized the non-aggression pact between Hitler and Stalin prior to World War II. This pact was then broken by Hitler when he invaded the Soviet Union. The breaking of the pact is similar to Frederick giving false notes to Napoleon. So the comparison between Frederick and Hitler is one of the other important comparisons that you come across in the novel. The confessions and executions of the animals reflect the various purges and short trials that Stalin conducted to rid himself of any possible threat or dissension. In 1921, the sailors at Croatian military base unsuccessfully rebelled against communist rule as the Hens attempted to rebel against Napoleon. So that is one of the other comparisons that you have between the novel and the revolution. The Battle of the Windmill reflects the USSR's involvement in World War II, specifically the Battle of Stalingrad in 1943, when Stalin's forces defeated Hitler's as Napoleon's defeated Frederick. Finally, the card game at the novel's end parallels the Tehran Conference, which happened from November 28 to December 1st, 1943, where Stalin, Winston Churchill and Franklin D. Roosevelt met to discuss the ways to forge a lasting peace after the war. a piece that Orwell mocks by having Napoleon and Pilkington flatter each other and then betray their duplicitous nature by cheating in the card game. So these are some of the important comparisons that you come across Animal Farm and Russian Revolution. You have the characters of Napoleon, Snowball, Old Major, Mr. Jones being compared, and also you have Frederick being compared with Adolf Hitler. You also have some of the important events being compared with the events that happened as part of Russian Revolution. I hope you have an outline regarding the various analogies between Russian Revolution and Animal Farm. As I said earlier, this is crucial because the criticizing Russian Revolution was one of the motives behind writing this novel. Thank you so much for watching this video lesson. So this is the last video lesson that you will come across as part of this novella. I hope you have a clear understanding of the novella as well as its historical background. Thank you so much for joining SJ's classes.